the 1967 Shelby GT500. To some, she was Eleanor, Hollywood's most famous getaway car. To others, she was a curse, dragging owners into lawsuits, scandals, and heartbreak. This was the Mustang that broke records, the car tied to betrayal at Le Mans, and the machine that sparked a $1 million legal war. But what most people don't know is the truth behind Eleanor is far darker than the legend. If you grew up in the golden age of muscle cars, or just love the stories that Detroit doesn't want you to remember, subscribe now, because every week we bring you the hidden history, shocking scandals, and forgotten legends of America's greatest cars. Now, let's step back to 1967, the year the legend was born. Number 1. The birth of the Shelby GT500 in 1967. Ford was locked in a battle for dominance during the golden era of muscle cars. Chevrolet had just launched the Camaro. Dodge was unleashing the Charger. Pontiac was building its GTO legend. Ford already had the Mustang, but they needed something fiercer. Enter Carroll Shelby, a former chicken farmer turned race car builder, who had already transformed the Mustang into the hot GT350. But in 1967, Shelby took it a step further. He introduced the GT500, a bigger, meaner, more powerful Mustang that instantly became a street legend. Unlike the smaller GT350 with its 289 V8, the GT500 packed a monster 428 cubic inch Police Interceptor V8, borrowed from Ford's pursuit cars. It was brutal, raw, and perfect for the muscle car wars of the late 60s. The GT500 wasn't just a car. It was Shelby's declaration that Ford would not be beaten in the horsepower arms race. For the young men of 1967, this car wasn't just transportation. It was rebellion, speed, and power, all rolled into one unforgettable machine. Number 2. The Heartbeat, a 428 Police Interceptor V8. The real star of the 1967 GT500 wasn't its body or its stripes. It was the heart under the hood. Shelby fitted the car with a 428 cubic inch Police Interceptor V8. This was no ordinary Mustang engine. It came directly from Ford's law enforcement. Pursuit cars, designed to chase down criminals on the highway. Shelby knew that dropping this massive motor into a Mustang would make a statement. Rated at 355 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque, the GT500 had brutal straight-line performance. Dual 600 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetors sat atop an aluminum mid-rise intake manifold, giving it the kind of air and fuel flow muscle car fans dream about. The car wasn't light. It weighed around 3,800 pounds, but the torque of that engine made it leap forward with ease. In an era when most cars were struggling to break 300 horsepower, the GT500's numbers were staggering. And while today's supercars might laugh at 355 horsepower, in 1967, it meant you had one of the baddest cars on the road. This was muscle car glory in its purest form. Number 3. Carroll Shelby's personal touch. One reason the GT500 feels so special is that it carried Carroll Shelby's personal stamp of approval. Shelby wasn't just a name on the badge. He was deeply involved in shaping the car. He believed the standard Mustang was a good foundation, but he wanted more muscle, more aggression, and more style. He added fiberglass body parts like the elongated hood with a functional scoop, side scoops for extra airflow, and distinctive racing stripes that screamed speed. Unlike the GT350, which was built for handling and racing agility, the GT500 was about brute strength and highway dominance. Shelby himself often spoke about giving young Americans a car that could outrun almost anything on the road. For him, it wasn't just about engineering, it was about creating a cultural icon. Every GT500 built in 1967 carried a sense of Shelby's philosophy. Cars should be loud, fast, and unapologetically bold. And that is why, even decades later, when people hear the name Carroll Shelby, they don't just think of a man. They think of a legacy of machines built to thrill. Number 4. The Muscle Car Wars of 1967. The Shelby GT500 wasn't just another Mustang. It was a weapon built for one of the most competitive years in Detroit history. By 1967, the muscle car wars were at their peak. Chevrolet fired a shot straight at Ford with the brand new Camaro. Pontiac had the GTO, Dodge was pushing the Charger, and Plymouth had its GTX. Every company wanted to dominate America's streets, and horsepower was the weapon of choice. Ford already had the Mustang, but they needed an edge, something that would make young drivers choose them over the competition. That's where Carroll Shelby came in. He took the already popular Mustang and turned it into a brutal street machine. With racing pedigree from the GT40 and a monstrous 428 engine under the hood, the GT500 had what it needed to outshine rivals. More than just numbers on paper, it carried Shelby's name, a name associated with beating Ferrari at Le Mans. That gave Ford something no other company had: credibility in both racing and street performance. To this day, enthusiasts remember 1967 as a year when Detroit's automakers went to war, and the GT500 emerged as one of the fiercest competitors. Number 5. Production numbers and rarity. The 1967 Shelby GT500 is rare, and that rarity is part of its magic. Ford built hundreds of thousands of Mustangs in 1967, but only 2,048 GT500s rolled off the line. Each one went through Shelby American, where modifications set them apart from ordinary Mustangs. This limited production created exclusivity from day one. For perspective, while teenagers across America could buy or borrow regular Mustangs, only a select few could claim they had a Shelby-tuned monster in their driveway. Back then, a brand new GT500 cost around $4,200, expensive for its time, but still within reach of determined buyers. Today, that same car can fetch anywhere from $200,000 to over $1 million depending on condition and originality. Cars with matching numbers, the original engine and transmission intact, are especially prized. Many collectors see the 67 GT500 as the holy grail of Mustangs, thanks to its perfect mix of style, rarity, and raw performance. For the older generation, this brings back bittersweet memories. These were once cars seen at high schools, drag strips, and drive-ins. Now, they're treasures locked away in private collections, appreciated more than ever but far out of reach for everyday enthusiasts. Number 6. Styling that screamed power. Part of the GT500's lasting appeal comes from its aggressive styling. Carroll Shelby wanted the car to look as powerful as it was, so he gave it unique fiberglass body parts. The hood was longer and featured a functional scoop to feed the massive 428 engine. Side scoops gave the Mustang a muscular profile while improving airflow. Twin racing stripes running down the center announced that this was no ordinary pony car. At the rear, the GT500 wore Thunderbird taillights, setting it apart from other Mustangs. Even parked, the car looked like it was ready to launch. Compared to the lighter GT350, which focused on racing agility, the GT500 looked heavier, tougher, and more intimidating. Buyers in 1967 loved this look: flashy, bold, and dripping with attitude. For teenagers of the 60s, pulling into a drive-in with a GT500 was like arriving in a Hollywood star's limousine. The design was as much about making a statement as it was about function. More than half a century later, the styling still turns heads. It remains one of the most recognizable silhouettes in the muscle car world, a rolling symbol of American horsepower at its peak. Number 7. The dual 4-barrel carburetors. One of the most talked about features of the 1967 Shelby GT500 was its dual 4-barrel carburetor setup. Sitting atop the 428 Police Interceptor engine were two Holley 600 CFM carburetors mounted on an aluminum mid-rise intake manifold. This wasn't just for show, it meant serious air and fuel delivery, giving the car its trademark surge of power when you press the throttle. Muscle car fans of the 1960s would often lift the hood just to admire those two gleaming carbs, a sight that symbolized raw performance. The setup gave the GT500 its rating of 355 horsepower and 420 pound-feet of torque, though many enthusiasts believed the numbers were underrated by Ford for insurance reasons. In reality, these cars felt much stronger than the official figures suggested. For older enthusiasts, that dual-carb setup is unforgettable because it represented the ultimate in street performance. It was a mechanical work of art, delivering both power and the distinctive roar that only a big block V8 with dual Hollies could produce. Even today, collectors and restorers go to great lengths to preserve or recreate that original carburetor system. Because it wasn't just a piece of hardware, it was the heartbeat of the GT500. Number 8. Quarter-mile performance. Numbers told the real story of the GT500. In an era when cars were measured by their ability to conquer the quarter mile, the Shelby delivered in style. With its 428 big block and dual carburetors, the car could blast through the quarter mile in about 14 seconds at speeds over 100 miles per hour. By today's standards, that might sound modest, but in 1967, it put the GT500 right at the top of the food chain. Few street cars could touch it, and for teenagers at the drag strip, it was a dream machine. What made the GT500 unique was how effortlessly it delivered its performance. While smaller engine cars had to be revved and pushed, the Shelby's massive torque meant you could launch hard and ride a wave of power all the way down the strip. Owners described it as effortless speed, a car that felt unstoppable once it got moving. For the older generation, the quarter mile was the battleground of bragging rights, and the GT500 was a weapon perfectly designed for it. Decades later, the numbers still hold up as proof that this car was built not just to look fast, but to dominate. Number 9. The Shelby badge meant racing. Pedigree. One reason the GT500 became legendary was the name stamped on its body, Shelby. Carroll Shelby wasn't just a car builder, he was a man who had beaten Ferrari on the world stage. His GT40s had conquered Le Mans, and his Cobra Roadsters were feared by European sports cars. When buyers in 1967 saw a Mustang with the Shelby name, they weren't just buying a car, they were buying into racing history. The badge carried prestige and credibility. Ford's rivals, Chevrolet, Dodge, Pontiac, could build fast cars, but none of them had Carroll Shelby's personal involvement. He was a celebrity in the automotive world, and his endorsement meant something. For young drivers of the 1960s, owning a Shelby was like being part of an elite club. It wasn't just about going fast, it was about owning a piece of a winning legacy. Even today, when people see the Shelby name, they immediately associate it with racing victories, high performance, and American pride. That's why the GT500 continues to stand apart from other muscle cars of its time. It carried not just horsepower, but a reputation forged on racetracks around the world. Number 10. Interior built for power, not comfort. The 1967 Shelby GT500 wasn't designed to pamper its driver. Instead, it was built with performance in mind. Inside, the cabin featured a roll bar with shoulder harnesses, something unusual for a street car at the time. The dash carried extra gauges for oil pressure and amps, reminding the driver that this was a machine meant to be monitored like a race car. The wood-rimmed steering wheel gave it a sporty feel, while the high-back bucket seats offered just enough support to keep drivers in place during aggressive runs. Compared to luxury cars of the era, the GT500 felt Spartan. There was no emphasis on plush comfort or quiet cruising. This car was loud, raw, and meant to make the driver feel connected to the road. Older enthusiasts often recall how climbing into a GT500 felt more like stepping into a cockpit than a family car. It gave a sense of purpose. The car demanded attention and respect from the person behind the wheel. In many ways, the interior reflected Shelby's philosophy: strip away the unnecessary, keep only what matters for speed, and give the driver the tools to command a beast. Number 11. Thunderbird taillights and distinctive styling. One of the subs. Most unique touches on the 1967 Shelby GT500 was found at the rear. Instead of using standard Mustang taillights, Shelby borrowed sequential units from the Mercury Cougar, which themselves were inspired by the Ford Thunderbird. The result was a taillight design that immediately set the car apart from ordinary Mustangs. Combined with the elongated fiberglass rear end, it gave the GT500 a broader, more muscular appearance. These taillights became one of the car's defining features and are still instantly recognizable to enthusiasts today. Small details like this reflected Shelby's determination to make his Mustangs more than just factory specials. They were statements of individuality. For muscle car fans of the late 60s, pulling up in a GT500 meant people knew instantly that it wasn't just another Mustang. Even today, at car shows and auctions, those wide taillights are a dead giveaway that you're looking at something special. They've become as iconic as the dual stripes on the hood. For many collectors, the styling touches Shelby added are just as important as the engine under the hood. They made the GT500 both a performance machine and a visual masterpiece. Number 12. Price, then versus price. Now, when the 1967 Shelby GT500 first hit dealerships, it sold for around $4,200. At the time, that was considered a lot of money, about 25% more than a standard Mustang fastback. Yet compared to European sports cars of the era, it was a bargain. For the price of a modest family car, you could own a machine with real racing pedigree. Many young Americans stretched their budgets, begged their parents, or signed on to long loans just to put one in their driveway. Today, the story is very different. A genuine 67 GT500 can easily fetch between $200,000 and $500,000 at auction, with pristine or historically significant examples climbing over the $1 million mark. The most famous example, the Super Snake prototype, sold for $1.3 million in 2013. For older enthusiasts, these numbers can be hard to believe. They remember when these cars were everywhere, lined up at high school parking lots, cruising down main streets, and tearing up drag strips. Now most are hidden away in collections, treated like rare pieces of art. What was once the dream car of American teenagers has become the prized possession of wealthy collectors worldwide. Number 13. The Ken Miles connection. Although the Shelby GT500 became famous on the street, its story is forever tied to the racing tragedy of Ken Miles. Miles was Shelby's trusted test driver, a brilliant racer who helped Ford's GT40 dominate endurance racing. In 1966, Miles won Daytona and Sebring and was leading Le Mans, set to become the first man ever to win all three in a single year. But corporate politics robbed him of glory. Ford executives staged a photo finish, slowing Miles down so three GT40s could cross together. Because another GT40 had started further back, officials awarded that car the victory, leaving Miles with nothing. Just months later, he was killed testing a prototype. Carroll Shelby never forgave Ford for what he called a stupid decision. While the GT500 itself never raced at Le Mans, it carries the shadow of that heartbreak. For older enthusiasts, remembering Ken Miles is part of remembering Shelby. The GT500 wasn't just a muscle car. It was born from a culture of speed, glory, and sometimes tragedy. Every time you see one, you're reminded of the man who gave everything for Ford and Shelby, only to be cheated out of the recognition he deserved. Number 14. Gone in 60 Seconds and Eleanor's Rise. The GT500's fame was reignited in 2000, when Gone in 60 Seconds hit theaters. Nicolas Cage played a car thief forced to steal 50 cars in one night, but the true star of the movie was Eleanor, a customized 1967 Shelby GT500. Painted in pepper gray with black racing stripes, Eleanor became an instant icon. Fans lined up to buy posters, models, and replicas. Demand exploded for real GT500s, pushing prices through the roof. Several Eleanors were built for the film, some for stunts, some just for looks. A few were destroyed during filming, but survivors became collector's items themselves. For older car enthusiasts, seeing Eleanor on the big screen was like reliving their youth. It brought the Mustang legend to a new generation. What shocked many was how Eleanor overshadowed even the Hollywood stars. People didn't leave the theater talking about Cage or Jolie, they left talking about the car. That movie cemented Eleanor's status as more than a Shelby Mustang. She became a cultural icon, a car with a name, a personality, and a myth that went far beyond the racetrack. Number 15. The Eleanor legal battle. With Eleanor's fame came controversy. Denise Halicki, widow of the original Gone in 60 Seconds filmmaker, claimed ownership of Eleanor as a character. She insisted that any car resembling Eleanor, real, replica, or even tribute, belonged to her legally. This sparked a decade-long legal battle that shook the collector world. Owners had their cars seized at car shows and auctions. Replica builders were dragged into lawsuits. Some enthusiasts even lost cars they had restored over years of hard work. Halicki argued that Eleanor was like James Bond or Batman, intellectual property protected by copyright. Courts wrestled with the question, was Eleanor just a car or was she a character? In the end, judges ruled against Halicki, declaring Eleanor a car and nothing more. They accused her of exaggerating facts and misleading courts. Collectors celebrated the decision as a victory, but not before many had lost money and confidence. For older Mustang fans, this legal war felt personal. Eleanor represented their youth and their passion. To see her tied up in lawsuits was heartbreaking, but in the end, the car survived, and the Eleanor myth only grew stronger through the controversy. Number 16. The Super Snake Prototype 1. Of the rarest and most fascinating chapters in GT500 history is the story of the 1967 Super Snake. Carroll Shelby built just one. Instead of the 428 Police Interceptor, this prototype was fitted with Ford's legendary 427 cubic inch racing engine, the same one that powered the GT40 to victory at Le Mans. The result was staggering: 650 horsepower in a Mustang at a time, when most cars barely touched 300. Shelby tested the Super Snake on a Texas highway, pushing it to 170 miles per hour. It was brutally fast, but also brutally expensive. Shelby realized few buyers could afford it, and the car was never put into production. That decision made it a one-of-a-kind legend. For decades, collectors searched for it, whispering about whether it still existed. When it finally surfaced at auction in 2013, it sold for $1.3 million. For older enthusiasts, the Super Snake is the ultimate what-if story. What if Shelby had built more? What if Ford had greenlit a limited run? Instead, the Super Snake stands as proof of what Shelby could do when cost was no object, a single untamed monster that remains unmatched. Number 17. Carroll Shelby's health and determination. Carroll Shelby's life was as extraordinary as his cars. By the time the GT500 was released, Shelby was already a racing hero who had transitioned into building high-performance machines. But behind the scenes, his health was failing. Shelby suffered from heart problems for much of his life, undergoing a heart transplant in 1990 and a kidney transplant in 1996. Most men would have retired long before, but Shelby refused to slow down. He continued designing, licensing, and promoting cars well into his later years. His health struggles only added to his legend, showing that he shared the same toughness as the machines he built. To many older Americans, Shelby embodied grit and determination. He lived through pain and setbacks, but never stopped working. Even in interviews late in life, Shelby talked about cars with the same passion he had in the 1960s. That relentless drive is part of why the GT500 remains so special. It wasn't built by a corporation. It was built by a man who poured every ounce of himself into making cars faster, louder, and unforgettable. Number 18. Collector values and modern market. The collector market for the 1967 Shelby GT500 has exploded over the decades. Back in 1967, the car cost about $4,200. Today, authentic examples routinely sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Restored models with original engines and documentation can climb well past $300,000, while rare variants or cars with famous ownership can reach seven figures. The Eleanor connection has only added fuel to the fire. Cars restored or built in Eleanor style often bring premium prices, thanks to their pop culture fame. What makes the market particularly fascinating is how it reflects nostalgia. Many of today's collectors were teenagers in the 1960s. They grew up dreaming of the GT500 but couldn't afford it back then. Now, decades later, they're buying the cars they once admired in magazines and at drag strips. For older enthusiasts, owning a GT500 isn't just about horsepower, it's about reliving their youth. Every rumble of the big block V8 brings back memories of a time when the open road felt limitless. That's why the GT500 remains one of the most desirable muscle cars in the world. It's not just a machine, it's a time machine. Number 19. A car that outlived its rivals. The 1967 Shelby GT500 has something most of its rivals don't: lasting cultural impact. The Pontiac GTO, Dodge Charger, and Plymouth GTX were all great cars of their time, but few have reached the same level of worldwide recognition. The GT500 lived on not just through Ford's marketing, but through its connection to Carroll Shelby, racing history, and later, Hollywood. While other muscle cars disappeared during the oil crises of the 1970s or were forgotten in decades of changing tastes, the GT500 only grew in legend. Part of that comes from its aggressive styling, instantly recognizable even to people who aren't car enthusiasts. Another part comes from the Shelby name, which Ford revived in later years to continue the legacy. For older Americans, the GT500 represents more than just another muscle car. It's a survivor of a golden era, a car that continues to inspire respect more than 50 years later. Its story, filled with power, tragedy, and even courtroom battles, makes it unique among Detroit's legends. While others faded into history, the 1967 Shelby GT500 carved out a permanent place in American culture. Number 20. Legacy of Eleanor, the name given to the customized GT500 in Gone in 60 Seconds, transformed the car into something larger than life. Most movie cars fade from memory after the credits roll, but Eleanor became a legend in her own right. Fans saw her as more than metal and horsepower. She was a character with personality. That fame sparked controversy, lawsuits, and endless debates, but it also kept the GT500 relevant for new generations. Today, when someone says Eleanor, almost every car enthusiast knows exactly what they're talking about. For the 60-plus audience who grew up with the original Mustangs, it's astonishing to see how a car from their youth became a Hollywood superstar decades later. The Eleanor replicas, with their pepper gray paint and custom body kits, are among the most recognizable Mustangs in the world. Love it or hate it, Eleanor ensured that the 1967 Shelby GT500 would never be forgotten. Her story proves that sometimes controversy and fame go hand in hand. And while the lawsuits may be history, the legend of Eleanor lives on, forever tied to one of the greatest muscle cars America ever built.